Who would you consider as the most badass person in history? Witold Pilecki, a Polish resistance fighter who voluntarily went to Auschwitz to get intel on what was happening and then proceeded to escape, survived the war and was later executed by the USSR. Inmate 4859. Helga Maya, also known as God's Rambo, a Danish special forces officer who bought a 1972 Camaro and turned it into an armored beast so he could deliver humanitarian aid in war-torn Yugoslavia during the civil war and ethnic cleansing. Galvarino. He was a fierce Mapuche warrior that had both of his hands chopped off as punishment when captured by the Spanish during the Arauco War. Rather than slaughter Galvarino, the Spanish sent him back to the Mapuche to send a message. But instead of causing the Mapuche to surrender, it had the opposite effect. Galvarino decided to have 2 knives lashed to the stumps where his hands used to be. He learned to fight without hands while using the knives as weapons. Less than a month later, Galvarino fought with the Mapuche against the Spanish again. Around 3,000 Mapuche warriors engaged 1,500 of the Spanish on November 30, 1557, at the Battle of Malaripu. Although they didn't win, Galvarino killed several of the Spanish before the army of 3,000 were all killed. If I remember correctly, he was offered a chance to live at the end of that battle, but he basically told them that he was going to fight them until they killed him, so they killed him. Witold Pilecki volunteered to Auschwitz death camp and escaped it to report what was happening there to allies of Poland. No one gave a frick at the time. I think Pilecki is the ultimate unit of badassing. Even in his kangaroo court trial he declined to show any sign of surrender. Desmond Doss, an army medic in World War II who was constantly belittled and abused by his battalion and superiors for refusing to use a weapon as it went against his beliefs. Then, when he landed in Okinawa and more than half of his battalion was shredded by Japanese machine gun fire, Desmond Doss crawled through the dirt over the course of several days to as many of his injured allies as he could and dragged them all the way back to the 40-foot cliff they had scaled up from, then lowered them to safety. Some of these injured men were lying 15 ft from the enemy machine gun itself, and all the while Doss wore his medic helmet, which stood out like a giant bullseye on a battlefield where the Japanese soldiers were ordered to kill doctors first to crush morale. In the end he had saved the lives of 75 men, and survived with an arm fracture from a sniper round and several pieces of shrapnel embedded in his body from when he tried to kick a grenade away from him and his men. He is the only soldier without a gun to be awarded the Medal of Honor. Peter Freuchen. He was a Danish explorer, journalist, author and anthropologist. He is widely known for his exploration of the Arctic Circle and discovery of vast areas of Greenland. He was an indigenous rights activist, having married an Inouye woman. He escaped a death warrant issued by the Third Reich for punching Nazis, received an Academy Award for the Best Motion Picture in 1933, won the $64,000 question as a contestant on the game show. He wrestled a polar bear and won. And as if this all wasn't enough, he escaped a near-death encounter in a blizzard by fashioning a spade out of his own frozen fesses. Dang, impressive guy. Took a turn at the end that I was not expecting though. Maria Oktyabrskaya. Her husband was killed in World War II, so she sold all her possessions, bought a T-34 tank, and went into the army. I didn't know you were supposed to bring your own tank. That teenage girl that was the sole survivor of a plane crash and made her way through the Amazon. She's definitely up there. That one Mexican lady who hunted down the cartel who killed her daughter. I probably wouldn't consider her the most badass human in history, but she's up there. Definitely Major Hugh Thompson. I'm sure there are people who have done similarly brave things, but not that I know about. In 1968, Thompson managed to stop the My Lai massacre almost single-handedly. He arrived after many civilians had already been killed, and couldn't understand how they had died. After realizing his fellow American soldiers were firing on unarmed civilians, he landed his helicopter between the Vietnamese and the soldiers. He then told the troops that if they continued to do what they were doing, he and his crew would open fire on them. After getting back to base, he filed a complaint about what he had witnessed. His complaint was covered up, and he was shunned as a traitor. It wasn't until 1998 that the army acknowledged he did the right thing. It's common to be brave in war when you know that you'll be lauded as a hero. It's another thing entirely to do it knowing you'll be seen as a traitor. He turned against his troops and country to protect innocent lives, despite what it would cost him, and I think that's about as brave as you can get. If I remember the story correctly, he returned to Vietnam years later and met with survivors of the massacre. He was met with love and gratitude, a pretty emotional reunion. IDK if it's true, but a story about a kid getting his limb bitten off by a shark. The uncle was with him. The uncle dragged the shark out of the water and retrieved said limb from shark. Believe the kid made a full recovery. Leo Major, or the American who shot down a Japanese Zero with his pistol while parachuting. That's badass. Sir William the Marshal, 1st Earl of Pembroke, the baddest man alive at a time where only hard men lived long enough to see their hair turn grey, widely considered the greatest knight to ever walk the face of the earth, defeated over 500 knights in tourney combat, is the man the code of chivalry is based on, defeated the greatest knight in France, Handley, in a one-on-one duel at the Battle of Lincoln in 1217. In his motherfucking 70s, effectively ruled England off and on through his regencies for decades. Signatory of the Magna Carta. He gets my vote. Came here for this. You left out so much, but there's only so much one can type. George R.R. Martin based Sir Bear sitting on this guy. Hence the quote, even now I can cut through the 5 of you like carving a cake. He wasn't joking, lol. Mad Jack Churchill. No relation. On D-Day, he stormed the beach armed with a broadsword and a longbow. He has the only confirmed kill with a longbow in World War II. At one point he was captured, escaped, and later found playing his bagpipes. Dude was a freaking legend. Raoul Wallenberg. During World War II he posed as a Swedish ambassador and confidently lied through his teeth at Nazis for years to save tens of thousands of Jews from the Holocaust. There were instances of him flagging down trains bound for death camps and yelling at the machine gun-toting SS men that Swedish citizens were on board, handing out homemade fake passport documents to as many Jews as possible as he went. He got away with it for so long because fascists have a thing for confident authority figures. The guy was captured by the Red Army in 1945 and likely died in a gulag. Christopher Lee, not the most badass person that ever lived but definitely one of them. Dude fought Nazis and was knighted, also was in a metal band and has been in lots of movies. He was also present at the last public use of the guillotine in France. Frick it, everyone's mentioning historical figures and people who made the news, but I want to nominate my dad's cat who took buckshot to the chest, shattering his leg and leaving gaping wounds in his chest cavity, who then played on literal survival mode for a fortnight before making it home, with an infected, gangrenous almost, hole in his chest. The buckshot just barely missed his heart from the vet's inspection. He got anesthetic whilst they cleaned up the infection and closed up the entry and exit wounds. He lived a relatively long and very happy life afterwards with his peg leg and passed on from old age. R.I.P. Puds. I second this badass cat. Ben Salomon. Dude was just a dentist who got drafted into World War II. He was tending to injured soldiers when 4 Japanese soldiers entered the tent and killed a man he had just saved. This man killed all 4 of them, then grabbed a machine gun and fired upon the incoming Japanese forces, letting the injured escape. They say when his body was discovered, 98 enemy troops lay dead in front of him. He had been shot 72 times and bayoneted over 24 times before he died. What a legend. Harriet Tubman. She was barely 5 feet tall, experienced spells because of a traumatic brain injury, repeatedly snuck into the South to free slaves, was a spy and led an armed assault during the Civil War. Experienced spells because of a traumatic brain injury, and by that you mean got a brick flung at her early in her life, which hit her squarely in the head, caving it in slightly, and for the rest of her life just sorta soft rebooted at random. Just clonk sleepy time with no warning. And yet she still made so many successful trips. Alan Turing. Single-handedly saved millions and had to live a miserable life after. He was a badass and a genius who deserved a much better life, but his work was not single-handed. Bletchley Park was a collaboration of heroic geniuses. John Brown is one of, if not the greatest Americans in US history. IMHO. He was born into an abolitionist family in 1800. He witnessed an enslaved boy his own age being beaten with a shovel at age 12 and devotes his entire life to freeing the enslaved. Brown had countless failed jobs as an adult, loses his first wife during childbirth, remarries and has a total of 20 children. Between both marriages, only 6 of his children would go on to outlive him. Moves between multiple states forming maintains additional stops on the Underground Railroad. Brown joined his sons in Kansas to keep the territory from turning into a pro-slave state via Missouri's border ruffians. This war between Kansas and Missouri is known as Bleeding Kansas. John Brown suffered illness, poverty, the death of a wife and multiple children. He spent years studying military tactics and positioned himself around the US in order to assist in the freeing of the enslaved. He and 21 men raided Harper's Ferry in 1859. Brown's plan was to initiate a slave revolt in southern states by taking over the United States Arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. It has been called the dress rehearsal for, or tragic prelude to, the Civil War. John Brown has been portrayed as a madman. Not only would he give his life to the cause, but he saw the enslaved and disenfranchised as equals. People to share a meal with. People to welcome into his home. He took the US head on to fight for a just cause and is rarely mentioned in history classes. Boudica, a Celtic queen who lost her kingdom when her husband died and his will was ignored by the Romans. She was flogged and put into slavery, her daughters raped, so she raised an army that very nearly ended the Roman occupation of Britain. She brutally took down almost 80,000 people, either Roman or people who'd succumbed to their rule. You can still see the ruins of Verulamium next to the city of St. Albans, and the layer of ash from when the city was burned to the ground was visible to archaeologists excavating the site. One of the stories of her death was that when the revolt failed, she drank poison to die free. In the British archaeology there's something called the Boudica layer. She fricked the Romans crap up so hard that she has her own layer in the archaeological record after only a year. Also Boudica means victory. She was the first Queen Victoria. Rasputin was a scary sob, and reportedly a hell of a hard guy to kill. May not deserve the top spot, but he's up there on the list, assuming badass isn't restricted to good people. Most of the stuff about his death were lies by the people who killed him to make him seem evil. Jan Žižka, don't scroll past. Read about this guy, the ultimate badass. Lost an eye in a fist fight at a young age. Quickly became one of the most formidable generals the world has ever seen. Anticipated the advent of the tank by 500 years by building armored carts with cannons on them. Rode into battle dual wielding a mace and a sword. Lost his other eye in combat but continued to lead his men. Never lost a single battle in his entire career. He was killed by the plague and it's said that he was so formidable and unkillable that his life had to be extinguished by the hand of God. When he died his followers started calling themselves Sirachi or orphans. His dying wish was that the skin be taken from his back and made into drums so that he could continue to lead his troops into battle. Has a freaking huge bronze statue of himself mounted on a horse on a hill in the middle of Prague. Man, there is something that touches my heart thinking of soldiers a generation down being led to battle by his back skin drums with young soldiers getting pumped thinking about how their fathers was led into battle looking at the back that's beating them forward. It's just powerful. Marie Curie, first woman to win a Nobel Prize and first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes, chemistry and physics, coined the term radioactivity, discovered 2 elements, radium and polonium, and ended up dying for her work from radiation poisoning. Her belongings will still be radioactive for another 1,500 years. Dead set legend. Olga of Kiev slaughtered all the rulers from the nation that killed her husband and literally burned down an entire village just because she felt like it. Mr. Rogers created a television show for children that lasted decades and was copied the world round affecting 1 billion children. Made the puppets, wrote the songs, wrote the script, ad-libbed, went up against a senator known for being critical of anything and everything and single-handedly saved PBS, was awarded a national medal for his show, was the subject of several viral YouTube videos, was the subject of major motion pictures starring a major star, is still beloved by millions and millions of people decades after his death, still has a foundation in his name, has a subreddit in his honor, Jonas Salk, created a vaccine that saved 1 billion people worldwide and gave it away for free. Da Vinci, sculptor, author, designer, etc. whose designs have affected billions of people. Ada Lovelace, Ada Lovelace, the mother of programming that has affected 1 billion people or more and whose principles you are currently using now, during a time when women were told they shouldn't learn. Maurice Hilleman, who, the guy invented more vaccines than anyone, saving billions of people from death and disease. Bad butt. I don't know who you consider a bad butt, but these are people I do. My grandfather was a Page 51D fighter pilot in World War II. He had an impressive career, albeit being shot down 3 times. The last time he was downed, he foraged and found shelter behind enemy lines, was taken in by a Polish family and recuperated in a barn for 6 months. When he was finally brought home, he stole a plane and flew it to a base where a girl he had been wiring messages to. He was absolutely hammered and didn't lock in the landing gear, bottomed out, set the plane on fire, was arrested. The girl ran out, fought through the police and gave him a kiss. She wound up being my grandmother. After an incredibly fantastic and challenging life, he wrote an autobiography called A Piece of Cake. When he told me the story about the love-fueled crash and burn, he offered me another round of blackberry brandy. I was 18 and already wasted. He was 80 and called me a candy butt and forced me to go drink for drink. I eventually passed out. At 7 AM the next day he woke me up with black cats, small firecrackers, under the bedsheets and told me it was time to gun break one of his horses. Cardiac kid. Shoot at me on the horse but try not to hit me. Still wasted, I saw 2 of him and made sure not to shoot between them. I also ran over his head with a tractor. He stood right up, dusted off his cowboy hat, and told me not to tell grandma. Damn it, I miss him. Wow, that's a lot to unpack there. The unnamed Viking who stood on Stamford Bridge, killed 40 Englishmen, and delayed the English army enough by himself that the other Vikings could prepare a defense. Smedley Butler was awarded 2 medals of honor, then during the Depression almost got a bunch of World War I veterans, who were at the Capitol wanting their retirement checks earlier than agreed upon, to overthrow the government, but then their demands were met and or agreed to about. Battle of Stamford Bridge. The lone Norse axeman single-handedly held up the entire English army. Horatius Cockles of the early Roman Republic is also a strong contender, single-handedly holding off an entire army while other soldiers destroyed the bridge he was standing on. He was so effective that the invading Clusium soldiers just resulted in lobbing swords at him to see if it would work. He eventually got a wound to the arse, called for bridge to be pushed down and jumped into the Tiber, swimming to safety. Another story, from the same conflict, Gaius Mucius Scaevola, who was a young Roman who volunteered to assassinate the king of Clusium, making his way into the enemy camp disguised as a fleeing slave. Unfortunately, due to a mix-up, Gaius killed an advisor rather than the king. The king interrogated Gaius and threatened to throw him into the fire unless he revealed further plots to kill him. Gaius casually walked over to the fire and stuck his hand in without flinching. The king, clearly unnerved by the absolute balls on the kid, just tells him to gfo the camp. Gaius doesn't stop there though. As he's leaving, he warns the king that there's an agreement between all the Roman youths that they will individually attempt to assassinate him, staggering their attacks by a drawing of straws. It meant that pretty much anyone the king didn't know personally was a potential assassin. The king decided to frick off and lift the siege. Canadian Rambo aka Leo Major. Dude liberated an entire town in the Netherlands by himself while injured in World War II. Heck yeah, Leo was awesome. Took a German tank over, solo, went head to head with an SS patrol, killed 4 and lost an eye to a phosphorus grenade, went on to become a sniper, and that's just the first paragraph from his Wikipedia page about his life. Dude was a legend. Despite all the crap he did that should have gotten him killed, he died in 2008 at 87, home in Canada. Daniel Inouye, senator from Hawaii, World War II vet, Japanese American who had to prove himself every step of the way through the European theater of operations, and to me an honest to goodness hero. In 1943, when the US Army dropped its enlistment ban on Japanese Americans, Inouye curtailed his pre-medical studies at the University of Hawaii and enlisted in the Army. 6. He volunteered to be part of the segregated All-Nisei 442nd Regimental Combat Team. This army formation was mostly made up of second-generation Japanese Americans from Hawaii and the mainland. Inouye was promoted to sergeant within his first year, and he was assigned as a platoon sergeant. He served in Italy in 1944 during the Romano campaign before his regiment was transferred to the Vosges Mountains region of France, where he spent 2 weeks in the battle to relieve the lost battalion, a battalion of the 141st Infantry Regiment that was surrounded by German forces. He received a battlefield commission to second lieutenant for his actions there, becoming the youngest officer in his regiment. At one point while he was leading an attack, a shot struck him in the chest directly above his heart, but the bullet was stopped by the $2 silver he happened to have stacked in his shirt pocket. He continued to carry the coins throughout the war in his shirt pocket as good luck charms, until he lost them shortly before the battle in which he lost his arm. On the 21st of April, 1945, Lieutenant Inouye was grievously wounded while leading an assault on a heavily defended ridge near San Terenzo in Liguria, Italy, called the Col Musatello. The ridge served as a strong point of the German fortifications known as the Gothic Line, the last and most unyielding line of German defensive works in Italy. As he led his platoon in a flanking maneuver, 3 German machine guns opened fire from covered positions 40 yards away, pinning his men to the ground. Inouye stood up to attack and was shot in the stomach. Ignoring his wound, he proceeded to attack and destroy the first machine gun nest with hand grenades and his Thompson submachine gun. When informed of the severity of his wound, he refused treatment and rallied his men for an attack on the second machine gun position, which he successfully destroyed before collapsing from blood loss. As his squad distracted the third machine gunner, Inouye crawled toward the final bunker, coming within 10 yards. As he raised himself on his left elbow and cocked his right arm to throw his last hand grenade, a German soldier saw Inouye and fired a 30mm Schiessbacher anti-personnel rifle grenade from inside the bunker, which struck Inouye directly on his right elbow. The high explosive grenade failed to detonate, saving Inouye from instant death but amputating most of his right arm at the elbow, except for a few tendons and a flap of skin, via blunt force trauma. Despite this gruesome injury, Inouye was again saved from likely death due to the blunt, low-velocity grenade tearing the nerves in his arm unevenly and incompletely, which involuntarily squeezed the grenade tightly via a reflex arc instead of going limp and dropping it at Inouye's feet. However, this still left him crippled, in terrible pain, under fire with minimal cover and staring at a live grenade clenched in a fist that suddenly didn't belong to me anymore. Inouye's horrified soldiers moved to his aid, but he shouted for them to keep back out of fear his severed fist would involuntarily relax and drop the grenade. As the German inside the bunker began hastily reloading his rifle with regular full metal jacket ammunition, replacing the wood-tipped rounds used to propel rifle grenades, Inouye quickly pried the live hand grenade from his useless right hand and transferred it to his left. The German soldier had just finished reloading and was aiming his rifle to finish him off when Inouye threw his grenade through the narrow firing slit, killing the German. Stumbling to his feet with the remnants of his right arm hanging grotesquely at his side and his Thompson in his offhand, braced against his hip, Inouye continued forward, killing at least one more German before suffering his fifth and final wound of the day, in his left leg, which finally halted his one-man assault for good and sent him tumbling unconscious to the bottom of the ridge. He awoke to see the worried men of his platoon hovering over him. His only comment before being carried away was to gruffly order them back to their positions, saying nobody called off the war. TLDR, blew up several German machine gun bunkers with mad grenades as he got shot in the stomach, lost an arm, and had to throw left-handed, then told the rest of the platoon to keep going because crap wasn't done with. Blocked a bullet with silver dollars, went home to Hawaii, became a senator, and if he'd run for president I'd have voted for him. Absolute badass. A little fun fact, he had a son who became a killer guitarist and played in the great DC punk hardcore band Marginal Man. Diprasad Pun, the Gurkha who took out 1530 Taliban single-handedly when surrounded. I was told a story of Gurkha in World War II where they were going on a joint operation and the plan was being explained to them. It was an airborne operation, behind enemy lines, very small chance of surviving. Afterwards they were asked if they wanted to back out or if they had any questions. The Gurkha leader said they would go if the pilot would fly as low as possible and try to fly over grass when they jumped. They didn't know they would be given parachutes. These psychos were willing to just jump out of a freaking plane. Juan Pujol Garcia aka Garbo. Guy was an educated, die-hard anti-fascist Spaniard during World War II. Approached the British offering to spy for them. They turn him down. So he approaches the Germans offering to spy for them, and he's accepted. He's given a mission to go to England and report on various things, but he can't gain access. So instead he just goes to the library and gives the Germans a steady stream of book facts mixed with nonsense. The British, who have broken German codes by this time, notice that the Germans have a spy who is talking nonsense and causing the Germans to waste resources looking for non-existent convoys. So, they have a change of heart and accept Garcia as a double agent, and he becomes simply one of the world's greatest bulls artists. MI6 feeds him some stuff to relay, but most of it he makes up himself, including a vast network of fictitious sub-spies, who are all given allowances by the Germans. His work helps fool the Germans into thinking there is a large army group prepared to invade Calais after the diversionary attack on Normandy. Hitler is so convinced of this that he prevents quite a lot of his reserves from reinforcing Normandy. Tens of thousands of lives are likely saved, if not hundreds of thousands. All because one man had the balls to walk into a German embassy, offer to be a spy, and then feed the Nazis a steady stream of bulls. And they never figured it out. In the waning days of World War II, Juan Pujol Garcia received the Iron Cross from the Nazis for his services as a spy. One of Garcia's classic tricks to ensure trust was to send actual intelligence either just too late or in the middle of the night, way too early in the morning when no one would receive his message. He constantly berated the Nazis for their laziness and wasting his time and got away with it. LOL. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.